Welcome back to Third Eye Weekly. Joining me today is Diana Brownstone, a certified professional consulting astrologer based here in New York City. Thank you so much for joining me today, Diana.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I'm curious, how did you first kind of discover this world of astrology and fall in love with it?
I I think it was as a small child reading about my sign and finding that there was a lot in common between the way it described the essence of who I am, personality, impulses, urges, and going from there, obviously discovering all the planets and all the interconnections beyond, just my sign. So yeah, as a very young child,
And
as a many astrologers.
so did you have any doubts from friends or family when you really discovered that this was the path that you wanted to embark on?
Not at all. Ironically, I got a lot of support, and as it turned out, my mother had gotten readings throughout her life from the writer of the Table of Houses, Hugh McCraig, and she was very supportive because she understood the validity. She had taken advice from him, and basically my family would come to me and say, what's going to happen here, what's coming up for me, where am I going to be working, I have all these interviews this week, tell me which firm I'm going to go to. So I started calculating, forecasting for them, and they were correct. So I said, hey, this is working, this is really fun.
Awesome. So I think it's interesting. A lot of people probably don't realize that you can actually be certified in consulting for astrology. So I'm wondering what goes into the certification process.
Well, you have to like math for one, because the first level of certification is calculating a chart by hand with a scientific calculator. So you're calculating planetary motion for particular dates and going through books of, as I said, table of houses, where you're looking at the degrees of the house cusps, which are the different sectors of the chart. So that's the first part that goes into it. You really have to love it. You have to want to sit for hours and look at the charts and look at the numbers of the degrees and just love the symbolism, just being able to, it's like another language, because you're looking at, right now, a two-dimensional piece of paper. Eventually we're going to have a lot of 3D charts, but you're just looking at symbols on a page and you're extrapolating the key important factors that will be able to translate to somebody and give meaning to what's going on in their life. So you have to be able to make connections and love symbolism, because that's what basically you're drawing meaning out of the symbols for the planets and the degrees. That makes sense?
Definitely, yeah. So speaking
Okay.
of symbolism and giving meaning to life, how can astrology be used as a tool to help us understand the different life cycles that we're undergoing?
Well, what it does is, if let's say somebody comes to me and they're having an issue in a certain area of their life, you can immediately pull out of the chart what is happening in that area and describe for them and give them objectivity for what is going on. Let's say it's a job situation and they have somebody, a boss or a coworker who's very envious, and they're giving them a lot of trouble, and there's backstabbing in the office. You might see a Pluto transit to their work sector. Pluto has to do with bringing things up that are hidden, and competition, that's power driven, power struggles. So what you can do is you can help the person see exactly what's going on and give them objectivity when they're caught up in a scenario, whether it be work or personal life or health. And through that objectivity, they can make a better decision, because it allows them to step away from it without their opening up and revealing information. It's sort of coming from outside of themselves, and they interpret it in the way that it will help them make decisions.
Right. And it's coming from outside of them, but it is still a very intimate kind of setting. So I'm curious how you go about establishing a real sense of trust and comfortability with people who go to see you for readings.
Well, first of all, we're usually in a very private area. They're either here or in a studio. Um, I've never had trouble doing that. I'm trying to break down what I do. I mean, if they have ever asked me if it's confidential, I don't think anyone's ever really asked me. I think people have seen me online or heard me lecture or seen videos, and they either going to connect with me and want to come to me and have that sense that I'm going to be trustworthy or keep everything in confidence, which I do. So I would say that they've probably really perused my website and seen me speak. And hopefully, I mean, like with anything, like if you're researching for a doctor or a date, you're going to want to have a good feeling. So if they talk to me on the phone or through email and explaining, I ask them a lot of questions beforehand. So perhaps my interest. So I try to get a really good picture of what's going on with them. Or what they're hoping to get from this, because then I can go right to the issue in the chart and direct the reading towards what they need, not just give them extraneous information that is cool but isn't really going to help them in that moment.
Sure. So I was hoping maybe you could walk us through what a typical kind of reading would play out like.
Okay, let's see. First, I would, once I have all the information and I've calculated all the charts, depending if the person has had a reading before, and if they haven't, I will go through the natal chart and sort of give them an idea of what I'm seeing and make sure that it's connecting with them, that it is really describing them well, and it sort of breaks down the boundary. So I think that also helps them feel comfortable in being open, because it's almost like I recognize them. I recognize who they are, what they've gone through, what their challenges have been, what their family life may have been like, and what their hopes are. So I go through that. So I think it reminds them of who they are, and if there are areas that they haven't yet explored in themselves, I'm just guessing that if I'm saying something that they don't know about themselves, it would allow them to feel enlightened or inspired to explore an area where I may see an ability or a talent or an ease in the chart that they may not have explored yet. So in that sense, I think that also helps them feel more comfortable, to answer your prior question. But then the next part would be to go through what's happening now. So I would be looking at their progressions, directions, midpoints, transits, solar return, and whatever other planetary return charts they're having. I know you've read up on this, so you might have an idea of what I mean by all those mathematical ways of calculating a chart. So we'll go through that, and we'll stop in areas where they specifically have questions and kind of really review that, and we'll pinpoint timing of things. And they'll take notes, or we'll record it, and they get a chance to ask questions, and it's really different with everybody. So some people are more talkative, some people just want to listen. Sometimes men just want to listen and they have a few questions here and there, and you can pinpoint a few things. So it's usually different. I mean, I have a set way that I go about it, but it can completely change based on the person. You really have to listen well and see. They're there to get help, and it's all about them and what they need. So I do all the preparation, and then it really depends on who walks in the door and where they are in that moment as to how the reading goes.
Right. So have there been many instances where you've been able to predict an event that was about to happen in someone else's life that you were giving a reading to?
Well, I would more so call it, I would forecast an event or the type of event. If they specifically knew something was coming up, I could give them a very close vicinity of the time when it was going to occur. But yeah, my clients come back to me, and a lot of them take extensive notes and write down the dates, and they come back because they're saying, it was crazy. I can't believe. And I'm like, well, I would hope you would believe it, because you're coming to me for a reading. I hope you think this is valid. But yeah, but a lot of times they're surprised at how exact it is in terms of giving them dates or the type of event, type of experience they would be going through. And actually, that's where I think that astrology is most helpful, because take a planet like Uranus, which is, expect the unexpected. You don't know exactly what's going to come up, but there's going to be some possibly disruptive, something very enlightening turnaround of events. So you're at least prepared for something. And then let's say something kind of crazy does happen. In a way, you don't get as thrown, because it sort of validates that this is kind of supposed to be happening, something like this, and you can go directly towards dealing with the issue as opposed to getting caught up with your reactions to it. And I think that's what we as humans do, is we react emotionally. We blame other people, we blame ourselves, circumstances, as opposed to saying, okay, this happened. This was sort of what's meant to happen, or something that's aligning right now. And so you're like okay with it. So accepting it is the first step of dealing with it. So it sort of shortens that time between the crisis and the reaction and the emotional side of it, that for a lot of people, crazy things happening can be very disruptive. So I think it's helpful in that sense as well. But yeah, I think it's more just having them know ahead. It's like, you turn on the weather, you watch the weather report. So you have a forecast, you kind of have an idea of what the weather's going to be. If you didn't check it out and there were thunderstorms, you didn't have your umbrella, you're kind of like, oh darn, why didn't I do that? And it's the same kind of guidance. It's the same kind of map that you get from knowing your astrology or getting a reading. It's the same thing. You're just more prepared.
Now, I'm curious, have you used this knowledge to help you with your own life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Without a doubt, I think that's what draws astrologers into it, whether you come into it, as many people do, being skeptics and not sure about it. Or, there were times when I would expect, when I was very early in my studies, I would expect a certain result from a certain transit. But definitely, because you're just prepared, and it allows you also to and this may be the opposite of what a lot of people think about astrology, is it allows you to accept the experiences you're having as that you have created or co-created in your life. It doesn't say, it's not like a cause and effect. It's more like coinciding. Everything is kind of coinciding. What you're doing is sort of meeting the time and the alignments of the planets. So you're not, it's not a fated thing, astrology. It's not like it's determining or planning things out and you have no control over the future. And that's kind of the misnomer that's kind of hard to correct, because you've got a lot of astrologers who are very caught up in ego that just want to predict and say X is going to happen. And in a sense, I don't think that's showing a good understanding of how life works, because it's your thoughts and your actions that meet the time, and that's what's going to determine what's going to happen. You can't say, okay, a war is going to break out on this day, because then everybody's thoughts are going to go towards that and kind of co-create, as opposed to saying, well, this looks like this is a very tumultuous time. There's a Mars-Pluto or a Mars-Saturn aspect happening, which has to do with war and conflict and butting heads with people. And you can go about it with the knowledge and the conscience to change the result, even if it's, a small bit, or it could be drastically, just because of your knowing in advance what's going to happen. And this art has been around for so long that, and it has been used for that purpose. So if you have it, why not use it for everyone's benefit, as opposed to using it fatalistically, saying, okay, war is going to break out, your marriage is going to end. It's just ridiculous to use it now. I think it's just more an egotistical wanting to make a prediction and then sitting back and watching and waiting. And that's, I think, the worst way to use it, is to not be empowered by it to meet the challenge of your astrological weather that's coming up.
So speaking to these kinds of misconceptions people have about astrology, I mean, there are a lot of people that clearly, as you said, are doing it just because it's an ego boost. How can people discern the difference between real astrologers and people that are just calling themselves astrologers?
I think if it resonates for you, if you go for a personal reading and it really resonates and it's really right on, and the person isn't telling you what to do or exactly what is going to happen, because nothing just happens. You play a part in it in your life. I mean, I could say, you know, you're gonna get that job, and you like sit home and get stoned. It's not gonna happen, because you're like, this astrologer told me I was gonna get the job, so I sat home and smoked all week. So yeah, if what the person says resonates for you and holds true, and they're not setting themselves above you like some guru who knows, you know, what's going to happen and doesn't empower you, I think that that's one way. Obviously, yeah, I think that's the best way. That's the best way. If it resonates with you and you feel empowered and you feel validated for who you are, and it feels like it's the truth, then they're a good astrologer, because it's obviously, you know, something that's helping you.
Yeah, got to trust your personal intuition. So,
Yeah.
what the most important thing, or one of the most important things you'd say that you've learned as a result of being an astrologer?
Ooh, let's see. One of the most important things I've learned, maybe how to listen better. I think, because that's probably what's helped me become a better astrologer, is really gearing the reading towards what the person, I mean, not telling them what they want to hear, but really understanding what the issue is and really working hard to find exactly the right thing that you can say and advise them as to how to cope with either a current incident or something that they see coming up. So I think it's really listening.
Excellent. So this is kind of a personal curiosity and aside, but I'm assuming, I mean, I know that you need a lot of information and have to do a lot of calculations to determine some of this information. But if I were to give you just say like a birth date and a time of birth, would you be able to tell me like off the top of your head without doing a lot of calculations, certain things given what you know about astrology? Or would that be too vague?
No, well, I could. I could, because obviously well, for one, I get your sun sign, which is kind of, believe it or not, it's pretty vague, because you're just getting one planet. And if you give me the year, I would have an idea of where some of the outer planets are. I wouldn't know where all the inner planets are. So I would obviously, I mean, I have the software. I do this at events where you pull up the chart and bang, you just go with the person and you just start talking and telling them what's in their chart, and then seeing what they need to know at that moment to move forward. So yeah, I have no problem doing. I've done a lot of that. So, and that's actually what gets you a lot of believers, believe it or not, because you're boom, you just met the person, they've just sat down, and you tell them something so personal that's exact, that's going on with their lives. So that's actually one of the very fun things about doing it. It's exhausting. Sometimes you do events where you're talking to many people one after the other. So.
Well, that's all the questions I have today. Diana, thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. Same here.
Awesome. So,